She just needed coins for milk, until his daughter whispered, "I like her better than all the ladies." The wind tore across Silver Creek like a restless ghost, rattling the wooden shutters of the general store and lifting thin clouds of dust that clung to the worn boots of travelers. Each footstep on the cracked dirt streets echoed hollowly, swallowed by the whispering tumbleweeds rolling past like lost thoughts. A bell over the store door jingled sharply, slicing through the monotonous hum of the afternoon. She entered, a woman whose dress hung loosely, faded, at the hem, as though the sun had tried to burn it from memory. Her shoulders hunched, ribs faintly visible beneath the fabric, hair tangled and brittle as dry straw. Her eyes, wide and wary, scanned the shelves, lingering on the small glass bottles of milk, the few coins clutched tightly in her calloused hand. Each breath she drew was shallow, like dry leaves skittering over a sun-cracked creek bed. She moved carefully, as if one wrong step might shatter her entirely. Yet beneath that fragile exterior flickered an unspoken fire, a resilience that refused to die, even under the weight of hunger and fear. The storekeeper, a man whose face was etched by years of suspicion and stolen nights, leaned against the counter. His eyes, narrow and calculating, followed her every movement. He did not speak, did not gesture. Silence stretched between them, taut as a bowstring, each second heavy with the possibility of betrayal or generosity. Outside, a faint giggle pierced the dry monotony. A little girl, no older than 7, sat perched on the porch railing of the nearby ranch, swinging her legs lazily. Her laughter was a soft, musical ripple, contrasting sharply with the harsh lines of the town. The child's gaze wandered, curious and unafraid, until it found the stranger's. Their eyes met across the dusty street, hers wide with cautious hope, the girl's bright and unguarded. In that brief glance, a silent understanding passed, fragile but real, a promise that life could be kinder than the world had shown. The scent of dust and milk mingled in the air, sharp and almost tangible, while the floorboards creaked softly beneath the stranger's feet. She placed her coins carefully on the counter, their clink a delicate punctuation in the stillness. Outside, the wind whispered through the crooked boards of the porch, carrying faint sounds of the girl's laughter, the distant cry of a hawk circling overhead, and the low groan of a wagon wheel struggling through the dirt. A shadow moved at the edge of the street, and the sound of heavy boots crunching against the hard earth announced the rancher's arrival. He paused just beyond the doorway, hands resting loosely on his hips, eyes dark and watchful beneath the brim of his hat. His presence shifted the air, and the stranger felt it immediately, a tension that prickled at her skin, cold and electric. The little girl's legs stopped swinging mid-air. She tensed, sensing the gravity in the man's gaze. The rancher's eyes traveled from his daughter to the stranger, noting the tremor in her hands, the gaunt lines of her face, and the quiet strength that lingered behind her wary expression. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. The creak of floorboards, the low hiss of wind over dry wood, even the distant howl of a lone coyote seemed suspended in anticipation. She looked up, meeting his stare, and something unspoken passed between them. No words were necessary. A spark of curiosity, suspicion, and something far older, something that would bind the events of the day together, flickered silently. The stranger's presence was like a pebble dropped in a still pond. Ripples were already spreading, touching every quiet corner of Silver Creek. The chapter closed on that suspended moment. Boots paused, dust hung thick in the fading sunlight, and a distant hawk cried out over the rooftops. The general store, the child, the stranger, and the watchful rancher, all were frozen in the tension of a story just beginning, a story that would twist the ordinary fabric of the town into something raw, dangerous, and heartbreakingly human. Night fell over Silver Creek like a velvet cloak, heavy and unyielding, swallowing the streets in darkness save for the flickering lamplight that spilled from the ranch house onto the frost-hardened earth. Shadows danced across the wooden planks of the porch, curling and twisting as the flames of the hearth battled the chill. The air smelled of smoke, dry hay, and the lingering cold bite of the approaching winter. Somewhere in the distance, an Owl's lonely hoot cut through the silence, a lonely refrain for the town's stillness. The little girl could not sleep. Her legs dangled over the edge of the porch, tapping softly against the wood in rhythm with the crackle of the fire. She had noticed the stranger lingering near the general store's shadow earlier, hunched over like a bird seeking shelter in the dark. Something about the woman called to her, a fragility wrapped in a stubborn courage, a sorrow tempered with an unbroken spirit. Quietly, she crept off the porch, bare feet muffled against the cold ground, until she stood just beyond the flickering lamplight. The stranger crouched low, offering her a small piece of bread, hands trembling but steady. "Here," she whispered, voice soft as the rustling of dry leaves. The child's eyes widened. Words spilled, unguarded, pure. "I like her. Better than all the ladies." The sentence hung between them, simple yet devastating in its honesty. The stranger's eyes softened, and a faint, almost imperceptible smile flickered across her weary face. It was a look that carried relief, wonder, and the faintest trace of hope, the kind of hope a broken heart sometimes dares to borrow. Inside the ranch, the widower shifted restlessly, pacing in the dim lamplight. His boots scuffed the wooden floorboards, each step deliberate, echoing against the walls lined with rifles, saddles, and memories that refused to fade. He stopped at the window, listening, not just to the wind scraping across the prairie or the distant creak of a wagon wheel, but to the faint laughter of his daughter, lilting and clear, drifting through the night. A slow burn of curiosity stirred in him, coiling tightly around the loneliness that had become a companion over the years. He remembered the gentle hands of his late wife, the quiet nights by the fire, the warmth of trust and love he had buried beneath work, grief, and the ceaseless grind of survival. That spark had lain dormant until now, stirred by a child's innocent declaration and the silent presence of a woman who did not belong, yet somehow did. Finally, he stepped outside. The cold bit at his cheeks, the frost crunching beneath his boots, but he barely felt it. His eyes scanned the darkness, seeking the stranger, and then their gazes met. Hers was steady, unwavering, eyes dark pools that reflected hunger, pain, and survival. She did not flinch under the sharp scrutiny of his stare. Her courage was quiet, almost imperceptible, but it made the hairs along his neck rise. The space between them held tension like taut rope, coiled and ready to snap. He noticed the rough texture of the rope on the gate beside him, the smoke curling lazily from the hearth, the faint, earthy scent of hay mixing with the cold night air. Every detail weighed heavily, painting a tableau of longing, fear, and curiosity. He took a step closer, though the words in his chest seemed trapped behind a wall of hesitation. Finally, his voice broke the silence, rough, low, and wary. "Stay back." The command was sharp, protective, a warning, but it betrayed him. Beneath the authority there was concern, and something else, a pulse of longing, a draw he could not name, tethered to the dangerous allure of a woman who carried secrets and grief like he carried his own. The wind shifted, tugging at their coats and hair, carrying the faint sound of the child's breathing, the whisper of dry leaves against the fence, and the soft crackle of the fire. The stranger did not step back. Instead, she held the bread, closer to the child, eyes flicking to the rancher once, briefly, and then away. Her silence spoke volumes, each movement a statement of resilience, trust, and the unspoken truth that she belonged here. At least for tonight. A distant coyote yelped, cutting through the night, and the girl giggled softly, brushing snow from her hair. The rancher's jaw tightened. He turned back toward the shadows of the house, trying to reconcile his protective instincts with a strange, growing fascination. Every line of his face betrayed it. The tension around his eyes, the slow deepening of his furrowed brow, the way his fingers flexed unconsciously at his sides. He inhaled sharply, tasting the crisp night air mixed with smoke and earth, and exhaled, slowly. The dark sky loomed above, a ceiling of velvet stitched with stars that offered no answers, only questions. And yet, beneath that vast expanse, beneath the quiet tension of the porch and the shadowed street, a fragile understanding had been born. A whisper, a look, a shared piece of bread. It was enough to ignite a story neither had dared imagine, one that would twist their fates together in ways the night itself seemed to anticipate. The chapter closed with the rancher standing on the frost-hardened ground, eyes locked on the stranger, the girl nestled safely beside her. The wind carried the soft creak of the porch, the distant call of the owl, and the first faint promise of something dangerous, something forbidden, and wholly irresistible. Snow began to fall over the Hart Ranch, slow, deliberate flakes that whispered against the wind like soft confessions. The world shrank beneath a quiet white, and with it, Silver Creek seemed suspended, muffled in frost. Every creak of wood, every shiver of the horse in the stable, every crunch of boots in the powdery drifts, became pronounced, intimate. The cold wrapped around the ranch like a cage, isolating its occupants, sharpening the sense of distance from the outside world. She arrived that morning, her skirts damp and dusted with snow, carrying nothing but the few coins she had managed to scrape together. Her eyes scanned the ranch carefully, cautious yet unyielding, noting the worn boards of the fences, the smoke rising in delicate spirals from the chimney, the way the child's bright hair caught the morning light. The girl ran to her, arms wide, a joyous little burst of warmth against the frozen silence. "You came!" she cried, and the woman bent down, gathering her into a soft embrace, her calloused hands shaking ever so slightly. The rancher lingered. In the shadow of the barn, boots planted firmly in the crisp snow. His eyes followed her movements, chest tightening as he noticed the grace beneath her weariness, the resilience in her careful steps. He caught a glimpse of a faint scar along her wrist, barely visible beneath a sleeve. Each time the child laughed. Her gaze softened, and the man felt a curious, unwelcome pull, a stirring he hadn't allowed himself in years. Suspicion warred with fascination, caution tangled with a seed of desire he could neither name nor ignore. She moved with quiet purpose. She mended broken fence boards, the scrape of hammer on wood ringing against the winter hush. Her hands were raw, knuckles reddened, yet each movement carried precision, a practiced rhythm. Later, she churned butter, the thud of the paddle against the barrel echoing faintly, the scent of fresh cream mingling with the acrid tang of smoke from the fireplace. Every task was simple yet monumental, each act of labor a testament to survival and quiet strength. The man watched from the doorway, his breath fogging the air. He noted the faint twitch of her fingers when the wind bit too harshly, the slight shiver in her shoulders, the way her gaze softened toward his daughter. His heart knotted in response, a dangerous tightness that he ignored at first, then could no longer dismiss. Meals were shared without words, the warmth of the fire bridging distance. He noticed how her eyes lingered a moment too long on his face. When she spoke to the girl, how her presence seemed to pull the room toward her warmth. "Thank you," she whispered one evening, voice low, almost lost in the roar of the fire. The words carried more weight than any formal declaration, and he felt it strike him like a blow, an acknowledgement of trust, of connection, of something more fragile and precious than the snow-laden world outside. Outside, hoofprints dotted the fresh snow, crisp and angular, telling tales of comings and goings. Smoke spiraled lazily from the chimney, curling into the gray sky like a ribbon of hope. Cold bit at their cheeks, stung their fingers, yet each small movement, passing of tools, shared glance, the way she handed the child a warm loaf of bread, layered the tension between them. Subtle glances carried promises, small touches were electric, and the rancher felt the tug of something forbidden, dangerous, irresistible. Questions lingered like fog. Who had she fled? What town? What betrayal? What darkness had driven her here? He dared not ask, yet the mystery burned between them, both a caution and a lure. Every time she spoke, it was measured, careful. Every smile offered was fleeting, like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. And yet, each time she looked at his daughter, the man felt the walls around his heart falter, brick by brick. As the sun dipped beneath snow-gray clouds, casting long, somber shadows across the ranch, he allowed himself a moment of honesty, whisper of recognition. He felt something stirring within him, something dangerous, something forbidden, something that could upend the careful solitude he had built since his wife's death. His jaw tightened, gaze flickering from the woman to his child, then to the horizon beyond the fences. The wind carried the faint scent of wood smoke and pine, of cold earth and hope, and he exhaled slowly, realizing the truth he could not speak aloud. For the first time in years, he felt the fragile promise of connection, of trust, of life returning to a heart he had thought sealed. And though the snow fell silently, blanketing the world in white, the fire inside the Hart Ranch burned quietly, insistently, lighting the beginnings of something that neither time nor fear could fully extinguish. The snow-covered ranch lay hushed beneath the gray winter sky, every corner of the property muted by the soft white blanket. Smoke spiraled from the chimney, carrying the sharp tang of burning wood and the faint, earthy aroma of frozen soil. Inside, the fire crackled, casting long, wavering shadows across the walls, but even the warmth of the hearth could not chase away the unease that had begun to settle like frost in the corners of the Hart home. A rider appeared on the horizon, a dark silhouette against the pale expanse. The creak of leather, the dull thud of hooves on hardened snow, announced his arrival long before the gates opened. His approach brought with it the weight of rumor and dread. In his eyes glimmered the news that would fracture the fragile calm they had built. He spoke briefly with the rancher, voice low, each syllable carrying a chill heavier than the wind. The woman was being hunted. Bounty hunters, driven by whispers of crimes that might have been true, might have been on her trail. Horses in the stables shifted uneasily, hooves scraping against frozen earth, tails flicking as though sensing the tension in the air. The wind hissed through the broken fences, curling around the corners of the barn and house, carrying with it faint echoes of fear that seemed to brush across every surface. The child clutched her small shawl, eyes wide but silent, absorbing the storm that seemed to gather in human form just beyond the ranch gates. The man turned toward the woman, his expression taut, chest tight, and voice low, almost trembling with the mixture of anger, fear, and concern that had been building for months. "Tell me the truth," he demanded, eyes searching hers for any hint of deceit. She looked at him, and for a moment the firelight caught the glint of tears in her eyes. Then, in a voice soft as drifting snow, she said, "I ran from the only life I knew." The words were simple, yet each syllable dripped with regret, pain, and vulnerability. Her confession hung between them like the weight of the snow-laden branches outside, bending, fragile, yet undeniably real. Their eyes met, heavy with understanding and unspoken truths. He saw in her gaze not just fear, but endurance, not just sorrow, but survival, not just the past, but the promise of something worth defending. The child watched silently nearby, her small hands pressed against her knees, witnessing the tension without fully understanding it, yet absorbing it as though fate itself were speaking through the adults before her. The wind moaned through the rafters, as a distant cloud of dust marked the approach of the hunters. Footsteps, though muffled by snow, carried the promise of confrontation. The hawk overhead circled silently, wings slicing the gray sky, a sentinel of the tension rising below. Each crunch of the snow underfoot, each creak of timber, each whisper of the wind became a part of the suspense, layering threat and inevitability into the moment. The man's jaw tightened, his knuckles whitened on the edge of the wooden railing. Every instinct screamed to protect, yet the weight of morality, the rules of a law-abiding world, pressed against his chest. Could he shield her from men who had no mercy? Could he betray the safety of his home, the future of his child for someone who was both unknown and irresistible? The woman did not flinch. Her hands rested lightly on the child's shoulders, her posture fragile yet defiant. Her gaze did not waver from his, silently asking him to make a choice: trust, protect, or abandon. He inhaled, tasting the cold night air, thick with smoke and earth. Finally, His voice cut through the silence, low, firm, unwavering. They won't touch you. Not while I breathe. The words carried weight, a promise forged in fear, desire, and something older, something primal. Outside, the snow swirled in small, relentless gusts, dusting the fences and the roof of the barn with quiet persistence. The hunters' distant shouts and the low thrum of hooves punctuated the silence, bringing the danger closer with each breath. Outside, the fire flickered and danced, throwing light across the faces of the three people at the heart of the moment. The child's small hands clutched a blanket, her eyes wide, but she sensed the protection woven into the man's words, the trust in the woman's response. The shadows on the walls deepened, echoing the unspoken threats, the secrets of the past, the promise of confrontation, and the fragile hope that one night of danger could forge a bond too strong to break. The chapter closed with a hush, the wind cutting sharper, the snow falling harder, the distant hunters a reminder that the past would not be ignored, and yet, within the walls of the Hart Ranch, an unshakable decision had been made. The man would not allow harm to touch her. The woman would stand, however tenuously, and the child would watch, unaware that the next storm would test all of them in ways none could foresee. The winter storm arrived without warning, a sudden fury of wind and snow that swallowed the Hart Ranch whole. Snowdrifts piled high against the fences, sealing the property in a cold, white cage. The wind shrieked across the open fields, rattling the timbers of the house and bending the skeletal trees. Outside, like desperate hands reaching for shelter. Each gust carried the sharp bite of ice, and the creaking of branches against windows became a relentless percussion, echoing the tension that had begun to coil between them. Outside, the fire roared defiantly in the hearth, its orange glow flickering against the rough wooden walls. Shadows danced across the room, stretching and shrinking like the emotions lingering in the air. The woman huddled beneath a woolen blanket, shivering, her skin hot to the touch despite the cold. Her lips were pale, her breath shallow, each one carrying the rasp of fever. The child slept nearby, cocooned in warmth, unaware of the silent currents threading the room like sparks from the fire. The man knelt beside her, rough hands brushing stray strands of hair from her damp forehead, the heat of his palm a shock against her icy skin. Every touch was electric, each glance charged with the forbidden. His fingers lingered, brushing over her wrist, tracing the scar he had noticed long ago, and a shiver, not entirely from cold, ran through both of them. He murmured softly, soothing words almost lost beneath the howl of the wind, tending to her as if she were the only fragile life in a storm-ravaged world. Outside, the storm mirrored the tempest within. Snow slapped against windows, branches scraped and lashed, fire sparks danced dangerously close to the hearth's edge. The cold pressed against the walls, a silent witness to the closeness between them, the unspoken promises forming with each brush of skin, each whispered breath. Romantic tension coiled taut, like a rope ready to snap, restrained by fear, morality, and the weight of everything they dared not say. The woman's eyelids fluttered as he brushed her hair from her face. "It's all right," he whispered, voice low, rough, and intimate. The words trembled with care, restraint, and the pull of something both dangerous and inevitable. Her eyes met his, a slow, heated acknowledgement passing between them, a confession neither had spoken aloud. Time became a suspended thing. The firelight painted their faces with flickering gold, highlighting the glint of frost in her hair, the faint sheen of sweat on her brow. Breaths rasped in the quiet, the rough texture of his hands against her soft skin, creating an intimacy that neither dared name, yet both felt in every fiber of their being. A sudden knock at the door, muffled by the storm, sent a jolt through the room. A neighbor, curious and suspicious, had glimpsed them through the whirling snow, misreading the tenderness of care for something else. Rumors would follow, a threat poised to shred the fragile trust they had built. The man's jaw tightened, eyes narrowing as the wind roared and the door rattled. His voice dropped to a hiss, swallowed by the storm yet powerful with intent. "Don't let them take her." The words carried more than warning. They carried a promise. Every muscle in his body tensed, poised to protect, to defend, to defy the world. And the woman looked at him, fevered eyes wide with both trust and fear, understanding the magnitude of the unspoken vow. The child slept on, oblivious to the danger and the desire, a silent observer of love and peril intertwining in the firelit room. Outside, the wind's howl intensified, rattling the roof and shaking the walls as if the storm itself demanded acknowledgement of the tension inside. Sparks leapt from the hearth, flickering across the floorboards and highlighting the edges of frost-crusted windows. Each flicker mirrored the near confessions, fleeting touches and glances that spoke volumes in the silence. Their hearts beat in synchrony, thrum mingling with the roar of the storm, each one aware that the world beyond these walls would never understand, never forgive. The storm raged on, a mirror of the fire within, relentless and consuming. Yet in the center of the heart ranch, between the crackling fire and the whirling snow, between fear and desire, something undeniable had ignited. A fragile trust, a dangerous attraction, a promise made without words, but carved into the quiet spaces of the room. And in the silence that followed a gust of wind, in the brief lull before the storm resumed its fury, the man's whispered vow lingered, protective, relentless, and absolute. Don't let them take her. It was more than a plea. It was a declaration of possession, devotion, and the impossible love that had begun to burn between them, fierce and unyielding as the winter storm itself. The storm broke slowly, reluctantly, as if even the wind and snow had known the moment of reckoning had arrived. Dawn spilled across the heart ranch, brushing the frozen world with pale, golden fingers. The snow glistened like shattered glass, soft and blinding under the first light, and the ranch stood serene and battered, scarred by the night, yet unbowed. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney, carrying the smell of wood smoke and burned coal into the crisp morning air, a testament to the warmth that had survived the tempest. Footsteps crunched against the snow, hesitant but resolute. The bounty hunters had arrived, silhouettes stark against the white horizon, spurred by the promise of gold and vengeance. Dust and ice clung to their boots, and the glint of rifles caught the sunlight like sharp shards. For a moment, tension froze time, the wind holding its breath, the trees silent witnesses to the fragile tableau of danger and determination. The man stepped forward, boots crunching firmly into the drifts, shoulders squared, his chest filled, with a courage he had only begun to understand. He had faced storms of wind, of snow, and of desire. Now he faced human threats with the same steady hand. The woman stood beside him, her posture unyielding, the shadow of fear replaced with quiet strength, her eyes catching the dawn light and holding it as if it belonged to her. The child, small and wide-eyed, crouched behind a fence, her fingers clutching the rail as she watched. The confrontation was swift, brutal in its simplicity. Words were few, gestures measured. The hunters, confident and reckless, underestimated the man's resolve. Rifles raised, hands poised, yet he moved with a calm decisiveness born of love and protection. A few well-placed words, a shift of stance, and the hunters were disarmed, their threat neutralized without unnecessary bloodshed. Each movement was cinematic, precise, like a choreography of survival etched in the snow. When the last shadow fell and the silence returned, the woman stepped fully into the morning, her silhouette radiant in the pale light. Her breath formed. Delicate clouds in the icy air, and snowflakes clung to the edges of her hair like fragile diamonds. She looked at him with a mixture of awe, relief, and something softer, warmer, something that had been forged quietly in the long nights of trust and tenderness. The child ran to them, laughter spilling like chimes through the crisp air, pure and unguarded. Her joy was a balm to the tension, a reminder of innocence untouched by fear or malice. She reached their sides, hands clinging first to the woman, then to the man, binding them in a small, perfect triangle of warmth and safety. The Man's voice, low and deliberate, broke the serene quiet. "She's ours now." His words were simple, but each syllable carried relief, triumph, and the fierce, unspoken love that had grown through storm and danger alike. No other declaration was needed. The sunrise itself seemed to approve, painting the ranch in soft gold and whispering promises of renewal. Cinematic imagery dominated every frame of the moment. Footprints etched into pristine snow, the curl of smoke rising from the chimney, the shimmer of frost on every branch, and the distant mountains bathed in pink and lavender light. The symbolism was inescapable: snow as renewal, washing away fear and grief, fire as passion, warmth and survival. The child as innocence, hope, and the unbroken future they now shared. The man and woman stood side by side, hands brushing almost imperceptibly, a touch that spoke louder than words ever could. Their eyes met, and in that glance were months of trust, longing, and unspoken confessions. The weight of the past, the fear of attachment, the peril that had stalked them, all of it dissolved beneath the clarity of this dawn. The child laughed, again, spinning in the snow, sending sprays of frost into the air, and the man allowed himself a small smile, one that felt genuine, unburdened, and free for the first time in years. He had protected her, claimed her not with force, but with courage and care. He had weathered storms, both literal and figurative, and emerged with something far greater than victory. A family, fragile but unbreakable, formed from love and redemption. Above them, the wind rustled the skeletal branches, carrying the promise of new beginnings. The snow sparkled in the sunlight, indifferent to human concerns, yet a perfect mirror of hope restored. The ranch, once merely a place of survival, now stood as a sanctuary, a testament to the endurance of love, trust, and human resilience. The story closed with a sweeping vision of the Hart Ranch bathed in the gentle glow of dawn, smoke curling lazily from the chimney, footprints marking passage through pristine snow, and the trio, man, woman, child, standing together, bound not only by circumstance but by the fierce, unspoken declarations of the heart. In the distance, the trees swayed in a soft wind, and Silver Creek itself seemed to settle into quiet eternity, a town forever marked by the small miracle of trust, courage, and love finally realized.